I am Rowan Knox, 32 years old, and my life in Portland, Oregon is like the old bus I take every morning, shaky, noisy, but still running steadily. My rented apartment is in an old neighborhood, where the walls are covered in peeling paint and the wooden floors creak with every step I take. It's not spacious at all. Just enough room for a single bed, a small desk, and a kitchen corner with a few cheap utensils. My job is as a caregiver for a home care service company. Not everyone wants to take on the difficult cases, the grumpy patients, the demanding ones, or those whose health is so poor it can be disheartening. But I'm different. I am patient, gentle, always smiling when they tell their stories and careful when helping them change clothes. Perhaps because I grew up with my mother, who taught me that kindness is the only thing that costs nothing yet holds immense value. I take on many such cases because they pay a little more, enough for me to send a small amount back to my mother each month. The income from my caregiver job isn't abundant, so I have to budget carefully, buying discounted vegetables at the local market, avoiding fancy coffee, and only occasionally treating myself to an old book from the discount bookstore. But I still keep everything neat and tidy. The bed must be made smoothly, cups and dishes washed immediately after meals. That's how I keep my life from falling into chaos, though sometimes lying alone in the late night. I feel loneliness like a cold wind slipping through the window crack. My current care assignment is Charles Blackwell, a 70-year-old man, the chairman of Blackwell Aviation, an aviation conglomerate. He is a billionaire, living reclusively in a lakeside villa in Lake Oswego, not far from Portland. The first time I went there, I was overwhelmed. The villa was like a palace amid the trees, with large glass windows overlooking the sparkling lake and vast gardens covered in autumn leaves. Charles has a terminal illness, late-stage lung cancer, making movement difficult, each step as if dragging a heavy stone. His breathing is labored, sometimes requiring an oxygen tank, and his health is declining rapidly. But his mind remains sharp, his blue eyes as keen as a razor, and he can discuss anything from politics to history. Living alone in that vast villa has made Charles contemplative and cold toward most people. The household staff told me that he had fired several caregivers before me because they were too noisy or didn't know how to listen. On our first meeting, he stared at me from his luxurious leather armchair, asking in a hoarse voice, "Do you think you can handle it, young man?" I smiled and replied, "I'll do my best, sir." And so it began. At first it was just work, helping him eat, taking his blood pressure, taking him for walks around the lake if he had the strength. But gradually we grew closer. There were afternoons when we sat by the large window overlooking the lake, sipping hot coffee. He likes his coffee black with no sugar, while I add a bit of milk. We read books together. He read about aviation history and I shared stories from my favorite novels. He often asked, "What do you think about life, Rowan? Is it all just flights with no destination?" I would laugh and reply, "Maybe so. But what matters is who sits next to us on the plane." We watched news about the aviation industry. He commented on accidents or new inventions, his voice full of passion despite his frail body. I listened, sometimes gently debating, and he would laugh, a rare smile that lit up his face. Being with him, I never felt inferior or out of place. Between us, there was no gap of wealth or status, only sincerity and understanding. He appreciated my simple kindness, the little things I did every day without ulterior motives. And for me, he was not just the person I cared for, but the only elderly family figure I had besides my mother, someone who made me feel trusted and needed. That Christmas was approaching. The air in Portland was turning chilly, with golden leaves falling all over the streets. I could sense the loneliness in Charles's eyes. One afternoon, as we sat by the fireplace, he suddenly confided, "Rowan, I don't want to spend Christmas alone in this big, empty, cold house anymore. It's been too many years like this." His voice trembled, his eyes gazing at the lake beginning to freeze over thinly. I was surprised, as he rarely showed emotion like that. "You're not alone, sir. I'm here." But he shook his head with a sad smile. "You're kind, but Christmas is about family. Invite your family here. Let's have dinner and celebrate together. I'll take care of everything. Food, wine, all of it." My heart pounded. I happily agreed immediately because deep down, I too longed for the feeling of a full family gathering after many years of just my mother and me relying on each other. Previous Christmases, we had simple dinners at my mother's house with a small turkey and a few modest gifts. Now the idea of a cozy celebration at the lakeside villa excited me. I promised to bring my mother along. My mother's name is Helen. She's 65 now and living alone in Oregon City. I'll bring her with me. I'm sure she'll be thrilled. Charles nodded, his eyes lighting up. Good. Let's make this Christmas Eve one to remember. As I left the villa, walking under the late afternoon sky with cold wind blowing through my thin coat, my heart felt unusually warm. Back in my small apartment, I lay on the bed, filled with joy at the thought of a proper Christmas that my mother and I hadn't had in many years. I imagined my mother wearing the old wool scarf I gave her, smiling brightly at the elegant dinner table. But why did I feel a vague unease, as if something was waiting to burst forth? I shook my head, telling myself it was just imagination. My life was about to change in the best possible way. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, my heart still racing from Charles' invitation. The weak winter sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, shining on the old wooden floor. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat at the small kitchen table, and picked up the phone to call my mother. The phone rang a few times, then her voice came through, warm as always. "Rowan, my son, calling so early in the morning? It must be good news, right?" I smiled, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was excited inside. "Mom, I have a special invitation for Christmas. Mr. Charles, the patient I'm caring for, has invited you and me to his villa in Lake Oswego for dinner and to celebrate the holiday together. He lives alone, and I think it will be really cozy." I told her the details, about the lakeside villa, about our afternoon teas, and about how he looked at me like family. Mom was silent for a moment, then she chuckled softly. "Oh, that sounds wonderful, son. I agree. It's been a long time since we had a warm evening like that. I'll get ready, don't worry." Her voice was cheerful, even eager, which relieved me. "You'll love it. I'll rent a car to pick you up on Christmas afternoon, okay?" She agreed, and we chatted for a few more minutes about the freezing weather in Oregon City, about her vegetable garden dormant under the snow. When I hung up, I felt like a child about to receive a gift. Everything seemed perfect. The following days passed in an excitement I had never experienced before. Every morning I took the bus to the villa earlier, and every afternoon I spent time with Charles preparing for the party. The old man seemed to grow younger by a few years. His blue eyes sparkled as we sat at the large dining table discussing the menu. "Rowan, what do you think about roasted turkey with cranberry sauce? Or should we add a warm pumpkin soup?" he asked, his voice enthusiastic, his trembling hand holding an old notebook. I suggested adding English-style pudding that my mother likes, and he laughed heartily. "Excellent. I'll tell the chef to prepare it. It's been a very long time since I celebrated Christmas with anyone by my side. In previous years, it was just me in this empty house." His words touched me. A billionaire with so much wealth, yet lonely enough to invite a caregiver like me. We hung Christmas lights around the fireplace together. He sat in his wheelchair directing while I climbed the ladder to attach the sparkling ornaments. The atmosphere in the villa changed completely. The scent of fresh pine filled the air. Soft Christmas music played from the old speakers, and the lake outside the window was like a mirror reflecting the twinkling lights. Every afternoon, while helping him take his medicine, he would often talk about Christmases past, about the family he once had but now distant. "You're lucky to have your mother, Rowan. Don't ever lose that." I nodded, thinking of my mother, and grew even more eager for the holiday to arrive. I bought a small gift for Charles, a book on aviation history that he had mentioned, wrapped in silver paper. And for my mother, I chose a pair of warm wool gloves, hoping she would use them in the bitter cold days. Those nights, lying in bed, I imagined the three of us sitting around the dinner table, laughing and sharing stories. Then Christmas afternoon arrived. The Portland sky was overcast with light snow falling. I rented the car as promised, an old but clean sedan, and drove to Oregon City. My heart beat faster as I parked in front of my mother's small house, the modest wooden home with a white fence where I grew up through the struggling years. She opened the door, dressed neatly in a simple gray wool dress, wearing the old wool scarf I had given her a few years ago. It was a bit frayed at the edges, but she always cherished it like a treasure. "Son, I'm ready, let's go," she said, trying to appear calm, but her excited smile couldn't be hidden. Her eyes sparkled and she hugged me tighter than usual. "You look beautiful, Mom," I said, helping her into the car. On the way, we talked about old memories. Christmases with just homemade cookies and a flashlight illuminating a small Christmas tree. "This Christmas will be different, Mom. Mr. Charles is very kind." She nodded, looking out the window, but I noticed she seemed a little tense, her hands clutching her purse tightly. "What's wrong, Mom? Are you okay?" I asked. She smiled. "I'm fine, son. It's been a long time since I've been to such a fancy place." We arrived at the Blackwell Villa at dusk, as twilight fell over the lake like a purple veil. The porch lights were brightly lit, shining on the thin snow covering the steps, creating an atmosphere that was both luxurious and chillingly wintry in Oregon. A cold wind blew through, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from the fireplace. I parked the car, helped my mother out, and we walked up the steps, my hands trembling with excitement. The door opened, and the butler greeted us, leading us into the grand hall. The crystal chandelier sparkled, a towering Christmas tree stood with gifts at its base, and the delicious aroma of food wafted from the kitchen. Charles was sitting there in his armchair near the fireplace, wearing a dark suit, looking healthier than usual. "Rowan, hello? And this must be Mrs. Helen," he said warmly, slowly standing up with the help of his cane. But then, when Charles's and my mother's eyes met, everything suddenly changed. The atmosphere instantly froze as if time had stopped. My mother stood stunned, her face turning pale, her eyes wide with horror, as if she had just seen the greatest nightmare of her life. Charles was the same. He opened his mouth, lips moving as if to say something, but no words came out, only labored breathing. His face went ashen, his trembling hand dropping the cane. I stood in the middle, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. What was happening? My mother turned and fled immediately, trembling, almost running out of the villa, her shoes scraping on the marble floor. I called after her, but she didn't stop, rushing toward the main door as cold wind rushed in. I hadn't yet grasped what was going on. My mind was spinning. Charles watched her go, his face pale again, as if he understood better than anyone the reason for the chaos that had just unfolded. He whispered something, but I couldn't hear clearly, only seeing his eyes turn red. "Sir, I have to go after my mother," I stammered, excused myself, and hurriedly ran after her. Outside, the snow was falling thicker. My mother was standing by the car, arms clutched to her chest, breathing heavily. "Mom, what happened? Why did you?" I asked, my voice shaking. She got into the car without speaking, just shaking her head, her teary eyes looking through the window. On the way back, I tried to ask why she had behaved that way, but Helen remained silent, evading every question. The car drove through the dark streets of Portland, the yellowish streetlights illuminating her face, highlighting the tears rolling down her cheeks. "Mom, tell me, what did Mr. Charles do to you?" I pleaded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Rowan, stop caring for him immediately. I promise I'll explain later. Just please trust me this once." The more I asked, the more she shook her head, only repeating that if I still cared for her, I should never return to that house. Her voice trembled, full of a fear I had never seen in her. "Mom, I don't understand. He's been so good to me. Why?" But she turned away, wiping her tears with the old wool scarf. I nodded to reassure her, parked in front of her house in Oregon City, and hugged her tightly. "I'll do as you say," I said, even though confusion was overwhelming me. Driving back to Portland alone, with cold wind whistling through the window cracks, I felt certain that between my mother and that billionaire, there existed a secret big enough to change my entire life. That Christmas night, instead of laughter, there was only silence and unanswered questions. I lay on the bed in my small apartment, staring at the dark ceiling, my heart heavy. The vague unease from the beginning had now become reality. A storm was coming, and I wasn't ready. In the days following Christmas, I felt like a lost soul. Portland remained the same, with the snow gradually melting into muddy slush on the streets and the festive atmosphere fading quickly. But inside my head, everything was in turmoil. I tossed and turned restlessly, staying awake every night, rolling back and forth on my narrow bed, trying to piece together the fragments. My mother, the strongest woman I know, why had she trembled like an autumn leaf in front of Charles? Their eyes meeting had been like sparks of electricity, full of pain and fear. I called her several times, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mom, please tell me. Who is Mr. Charles? Why did you run away when you saw him?" But she evaded every question, her voice weary over the phone. "Rowan, don't ask about that anymore. I'm fine. Focus on your work." Then she hung up, and I knew she had been locking herself indoors for days, barely stepping outside. I imagined her sitting alone in her small house in Oregon City, windows shut tight, curtains drawn as if hiding from the entire world. When I visited, she opened the door with a pale face, dark circles under her eyes, and only said a few vague words about the weather before telling me to leave early. "I'm just tired." She avoided my gaze, and that made my heart ache. I had never seen my mother so vulnerable, like a wounded bird huddled in its nest. The confusion inside me grew larger, like a balloon inflating to the point of bursting. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, only thinking about that secret. What was it? An old grudge? A mistake from her youth? Or something worse? I knew I had to take action. I couldn't let it gnaw at me forever. Unable to bear it any longer, 3 days after Christmas, I decided to take the initiative and go to the Blackwell Villa. That morning, Portland was drizzling persistently, water pooling into puddles on the roads. I took the bus as usual, but my heart was heavy, without the excitement of previous days. The winding road to Lake Oswego seemed longer, the lake gray and dull under the rain, reflecting the bare tree branches. When I arrived, the butler opened the door, looking at me with surprise. "Rowan, the master is resting. Do you have an appointment?" I shook my head, my voice firm. "I need to see him, just for a few minutes." She led me into the grand hall, where the Christmas tree was still there, but the lights were off, the gifts lying motionless at its base like a reminder of the unfinished holiday evening. Charles sat silently in the vast room, looking more defeated than usual. He was in his old leather armchair, oxygen tank beside him, his face gaunt, his blue eyes clouded with fatigue. He whispered when he saw me, his voice hoarse. "Rowan, you've come. I've been waiting for you." I sat down opposite him, my heart pounding. "Sir, I've come to resign, and I need you to explain everything clearly. My mother, Why did that happen?" He looked at me for a long time, then after a very long silence, as if wrestling internally, he began to recount the past, his voice slow and full of pain. "It started many years ago, Rowan. More than 40 years now. Helen, your mother, used to be a young worker in one of the Blackwell conglomerate's factories. At that time, I was only 25, apprenticing in the family company. We met by chance in the workshop. She worked on the assembly line, her hands quick with aircraft parts, her smile radiant amid the noisy machinery. I often visited the workshop for inspections, and gradually we started talking. At first, just casual greetings, then shared lunches in the cafeteria. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady himself before continuing, his voice lowering. Helen was intelligent, humorous, and had a warm heart that I'd never encountered in anyone from high society. We fell deeply in love in a short but incredibly happy time. Evenings dating by the lake, walking hand in hand at sunset, or sitting in the car listening to an old radio, dreaming about the future. I'd never felt so alive. His voice trembled, his gaze distant toward the lake where rain was pattering. I sat silently, breathing heavily, imagining my mother when she was young, radiant, smiling brightly beside the man who now was just a sick old man before me. But in my mind, one question echoed. If they had loved each other so deeply, why had it all fallen apart? Charles paused, sipped some water, then continued, his voice dropping even lower. When I wanted to take things further and ask my family for permission to marry, everything collapsed. My parents immediately opposed it fiercely. They saw Helen, a poor girl with little education, not of equal status, as a threat to the Blackwell family's reputation. "You cannot marry a factory girl," my father shouted, his face red with anger. "She'll drag our family into the mud." He fell silent for a few seconds, his hands clenched tightly, then continued in a choked voice. "They gave me an ultimatum. If I continued the relationship, I would be disowned, cut off from the inheritance, and treated as if I were no longer part of the family. Back then, I was too young, too ambitious, obsessed with power and my future position in the conglomerate. I dreamed of leading Blackwell Aviation, soaring high in the business world. And in the end, I was cowardly. I chose my family, the legacy, everything, except the woman I truly loved." He bowed his head, tears rolling down his cheeks. My heart tightened. Anger surged as I thought of my mother being abandoned simply because she was poor. But at that moment, I also felt the loneliness and regret crushing the man before me. Charles sighed softly, his voice lowering further, hoarse from exhaustion and remorse. As for Helen, when she learned she was being discarded, she was both heartbroken and humiliated. I remember that day clearly. I went to see her at the workshop, whispering the breakup amid the roaring machines. She cried, her eyes red, but she didn't beg. Helen just looked at me with a deep disappointment that I still can't forget to this day. That breakup devastated me, and that decision became a wound that never healed. He paused, coughed a few times, then continued, his voice shaking as if confessing his own sin. "I married a woman of equal status arranged by my family, but that marriage was as cold as the lake in winter. When my parents passed away 40 years ago, I started searching for Helen, traveling across states, asking friends, hiring private detectives, digging through old records, but it was all in vain. She had vanished from the face of the earth. For 4 decades, the guilt haunted me like a curse. I always believed that my cowardice had ruined Helen's life, and I've never forgiven myself. Every night I wondered how she was living, whether she was happy or not." He fell silent. The room sank into heavy quiet. I sat there, stunned and in pain. All the pieces gradually fit together. The evasion from my mother, the gaps in her stories about the past, the things she had never spoken of. I suddenly understood that what Helen was fleeing was not just an unfinished romance, but a pain that had lasted for decades, and perhaps across our generation as well. After recounting the past between him and my mother in their youth, Charles was silent for a long while, then gently asked about our lives over the years, like someone genuinely concerned for the woman he had once loved but lost. "Rowan, tell me about Helen. How has she been living? And you? How did you grow up?" His voice was gentle but full of longing. I hesitated for a moment, then began to tell him, my voice slow because every word stirred memories. "My mother raised me single-handedly from when I was very young. With no support, she took on heavy jobs to make ends meet. Day shifts at a garment factory, night shifts at fast food restaurants, sometimes working 10 hours straight just to pay rent and put me through school. She came home with swollen feet, clothes reeking of grease, but she still smiled when she saw me. 'What did you learn at school today?' she would ask, even though she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. I paused, picturing those late nights when she sat sewing under the dim yellow light, her eyes blurring from exhaustion. I continued, my voice deepening as old memories flooded back. Most of my childhood was spent in hardship. We moved frequently because rent kept rising. My mother often ate less to save portions for me. She always said, 'I'm full, you eat.' But I knew she was hungry. She never complained, never uttered a bitter word. She always just smiled, ruffled my hair, and asked if I was okay instead. 'As long as we have each other, that's enough, Rowan,' she used to say that." Charles listened in silence. His face grew paler, his trembling hands gripping the armrests as if trying to keep himself from collapsing. I took a deep breath and went on. When I was little, I used to ask my mother about my father. But Helen always said he had passed away long ago and she didn't want to talk about the past. After that, I asked less, but on nights lying staring at the ceiling, I still wondered who he was, what he looked like, whether he ever thought about me. Charles closed his eyes. A tear rolled down his wrinkled cheek. He nodded very slightly as if every excuse had become meaningless. "That's the consequence of wrong choices in youth," he whispered, his voice breaking. I caused all of it." The room fell silent. I looked at him, a man who had once stood at the pinnacle of power, now left only with regret and pain. And for the first time, I understood that some mistakes cannot be fixed. They can only be carried for life. The room sank into oppressive silence, broken only by the pattering rain outside the window and Charles's labored breathing. I felt the vast gulf of wealth versus poverty, power versus vulnerability in the story between Helen and Charles, almost swallowing the entire space. He was a billionaire in a vast villa. My mother and I were just struggling workers, and this secret was like an abyss separating us. I left the villa with a heavy heart. The old man's story of the past made me pity my mother even more and realize how much hidden pain she had endured that I had never known. On the bus ride back, rain lashing against the windows, I thought about my mother. How had she endured it all alone? I decided not to tell her about this meeting, but my heart was full of turmoil. The secret had now been partially revealed, but I felt that the real storm was only just beginning. In the days that followed, I tried to push everything back onto its old track, but my heart felt like an open wound, bleeding every time I thought about it. The next morning, I went to the management company's office in downtown Portland, where the gray walls and the ever-present smell of coffee always made me feel like part of life's routine machinery. I stood in front of my boss's desk, my voice slightly trembling. "I'd like to request a transfer to a new care assignment. The Blackwell case. I can't continue." She looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Why, Rowan? He's spoken very highly of you." I shook my head, forcing a smile. "It's personal. I need a change." She nodded without pressing further and arranged a new patient for me, an 80-year-old woman in the suburbs with Parkinson's needing daily assistance. I felt I couldn't continue working at the Blackwell Villa because I didn't want to cause my mother any more worry. Every time I thought about returning there, I saw her pale face from Christmas night and my heart tightened. I didn't want her to endure any more pain because of me. In the weeks that followed, my life gradually returned to calm on the surface, but that was only an appearance. Every morning I woke up early, brewed black coffee in my old mug, then took the bus to the new patient's house. The old lady's name was Margaret. She lived in a small wooden house with a garden of withered flowers due to winter. She often told stories about her youth, her voice trembling, and I listened, helping her eat, bathe, and take walks around the neighborhood. The familiar work helped me forget somewhat, but every afternoon on the way home, as the sun set behind Portland's tall buildings, the confusion flooded back. I ate dinner alone in my small apartment, sitting silently at the kitchen table, the yellow light casting shadows on the dark window ahead. Late at night, I lay awake, replaying Charles's words. The unfinished love, the opposition from his family and my mother, a young girl abandoned. Why had she never told me? I wondered, and the pain cut like a knife. Life was calm on the outside, but inside me was a whirlwind sweeping away every thought. Every weekend, I visited my mother in Oregon City, taking the old bus along the winding roads, cold wind whistling through the cracks. Her small house was still the same, with its white fence and vegetable garden dormant under thin snow. But each time I arrived, I found her paler and more weary. She opened the door with a forced smile, dark circles under her eyes as if she hadn't slept enough. We sat at the kitchen table drinking hot tea, talking vaguely about the weather or my work. But whenever I accidentally mentioned Charles, even briefly, like, "Today I cared for a new patient who's a bit like him," she immediately averted her gaze, her hands clutching the teacup tightly, her voice faltering. "Don't mention him anymore. I don't want to hear it." I saw her tremble as if the name itself were a knife stabbing an old wound. My heart ached, but I didn't dare probe deeper, afraid she would collapse. Those visits only increased my confusion. My mother, the strong woman who had raised me through so much hardship, now seemed like a ghost evading the past. I hugged her goodbye, drove back to Portland with a heavy heart, wondering how deep that secret went. Then one evening, about 3 weeks later, as I had just returned home after a tiring shift, my feet aching from standing all day, there was unexpectedly a knock at the door. I startled. No one rarely visited my apartment, especially at 8 in the evening when Portland was already pitch black and rain was pattering steadily. I looked through the peephole and saw a middle-aged man in a black suit, holding a briefcase, standing in the dim hallway. I asked who it was, my voice cautious. The man replied, "I am Harvey Caldwell, attorney for Mr. Charles Blackwell. I need to speak with Rowan Knox." My heart pounded. Charles? Why was his lawyer coming to see me? I opened the door, invited him in, and we sat at the small kitchen table under the dim yellow light. He looked serious, with a square face and silver-rimmed glasses, his voice deep and warm. "Rowan, I've come at Mr. Charles' request. His health has deteriorated severely. The illness has progressed faster than expected. The doctors say he doesn't have much time left, perhaps only a few days." His words hit me like lightning. I sat frozen, my hands trembling as I held a glass of water. Charles, the old man I had grown attached to, the one who had shared the secret of the past with me, was dying. "Before he passes," Harvey continued, "his final wish is to see you again, and to see Mrs. Helen as well." The news left me stunned, as if someone had slapped me hard. Even though I had quit the job, deep down I still felt an indescribable bond with that lonely but warm old man. The afternoon teas by the lake, the stories about life, all rushed back, making my eyes sting. But what puzzled me most was why Charles wanted to see Helen. Why her? After everything that happened on Christmas night, after the secret of their unfinished love, what more did he have to say? Harvey handed me a business card. "He's waiting for your decision. Contact me if you agree." He left, leaving me sitting alone in the silent apartment, my mind spinning. I couldn't decide on my own. I had to hear my mother's opinion before deciding whether to take her to see Charles. Even though it was late, I immediately took the bus to Oregon City, my heart full of anxiety and fear. On the way, the rain fell heavily, streetlights blurred, and I wondered, could my mother handle it? That secret was about to explode. When I arrived at my mother's house, it was nearly 10 at night. She opened the door in surprise, wearing her old wool cardigan, hair disheveled. "Rowan, what are you doing here so late? Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice worried. We sat at the kitchen table under the faint light, and I recounted Harvey's words about Charles's health, about his final wish. Helen initially turned pale, emotions surging as if the old fear had been yanked from the deep pit she had hidden it in for decades. She sat silently, hand over her mouth, eyes wide with horror, as if Christmas night was repeating itself. "No, it can't be," she whispered, her voice trembling. I held her hand. "Mom, he's leaving soon. He wants to see us. I don't know what to do." After many minutes of heavy silence, broken only by the rain tapping the window, Helen finally admitted the truth she had hidden from me my whole life. "Rowan, my son, Charles Blackwell, is your biological father." Her words exploded in my head like a bomb. Everything around me blurred. My father? Charles, that lonely billionaire old man, was my father? I sat frozen, my heart racing wildly, struggling to breathe. Helen continued, her voice breaking, tears rolling down. "After Charles broke up with me, I discovered I was pregnant. The panic and humiliation were so overwhelming that I didn't dare try to contact him even once. I was afraid that if the Blackwell family found out, they might come for us, take the child, or even do something worse to protect the family's reputation. They were powerful people, son, and I was just a poor girl." She paused, wiping tears with her sleeve, and I saw her trembling like an autumn leaf. So I quietly left the city, moved constantly, took any job I could. Cleaning, washing dishes, sewing, living in hiding for nearly a year before settling in Oregon City to give birth to you. No one knew where I was. I changed contacts, addresses, avoided everyone I had ever known. I lived like a ghost just to protect you. Helen said she had told me my father was dead not because she wanted to deceive me, but because it was the only way to shield me from the shadow of the Blackwell family. I just wanted my son to grow up in peace without fear of being found, without fear of being hurt. I didn't want you dragged into that wealthy but cruel world. Hearing that, I was reeling, the world collapsing beneath my feet. My impoverished childhood, the constant moves, the meager meals, the unanswered questions about my father, all suddenly became pieces of a truth too immense. The times I saw my mother quietly crying in the kitchen, wiping tears when I suddenly walked in saying, "I'm just cutting onions, son." Now I understood. That was the pain she had buried. My heart ached with pain, pity for my mother, and a sense of betrayal, but deep down I knew she had done everything just to keep me safe. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice choked, hugging her tightly. Helen confessed she had carried resentment for many years. Not because Charles abandoned her, but because he chose power over protecting her when she was most desperate. He chose his family, chose money, left me with the child in my womb. I didn't want you to grow up with the image of a father like that, cowardly and selfish, she said, her voice full of bitterness, but then it softened as she looked at me. But when I told her that Charles was dying and his final wish was to see us both, my mother's eyes gradually softened. She sat silently for a long time, gripping my hand tightly as if wrestling internally. Despite the torment and hurt in her heart, she understood that I had the right to know the truth and that Charles had the right to see the son he had never raised. "My son, you deserve to acknowledge your father even if it's late, and he perhaps needs forgiveness before he goes." After much hesitation, Helen nodded in agreement to go with me. She prepared for the meeting not just as a farewell, but as a way to face the life she had been running from. She stood up, wiped her tears, and began gathering a few simple things, her voice more resolute. "We'll go, Rowan. For you." I stood beside my mother, feeling as if the world had opened a new door, a door filled with truth, tears, and a reunion that was both terrifying and inevitable waiting ahead. My heart beat fast, excitement mixed with fear. My father, from now on I had a father, even if only in his final moments. But would that meeting bring peace or more pain? I hugged my mother. We sat together under the kitchen light, rain still falling outside the window, and I knew the real storm was about to arrive. The next morning, the Portland sky remained overcast, rain falling ceaselessly, as if the heavens were weeping on our behalf. I brewed hot tea for my mother. The two of us ate breakfast in silence. Just toasted bread and old strawberry jam. Mom wore her simple gray wool dress wrapped in the old wool scarf I had given her. Her face was calmer, but I noticed her hands trembling as she held the cup. "Are you ready, son?" she asked, her voice resolute. I nodded, but my heart was a storm. We took the bus to Lake Oswego, the winding road under the rain, the lake hazy like a shattered mirror. On the bus, Mom held my hand tightly and whispered, "No matter what happens, you are still my son. Don't let the past change that." Her words moved me, but they also heightened the tension. This meeting could heal or destroy everything. When we arrived at the Blackwell Villa on that gray, rainy afternoon, cold winds slapped our faces, carrying the scent of wet earth and fresh pine. The iron gate opened. The garden was soaked, fallen leaves scattering underfoot. The palliative care nurse quietly stepped out, a middle-aged woman with a weary face carrying her bag of supplies. She looked at us and nodded sadly. "He's waiting. There isn't much time left." Her words cut like a knife, leaving us standing before the door to the sick room where Charles lay gasping for breath. My heart pounded wildly, my hands ice cold, and I felt as if I were stepping into a nightmare. Mom took a deep breath, then pushed the door open and entered first. The once spacious room where we used to enjoy tea by the lake was now dim, curtains drawn tight, lit only by the faint glow from the bedside lamp. The smell of antiseptic mingled with the odor of age, making the air heavy. Charles lay on the hospital bed, his emaciated body under white blankets, the oxygen tank humming steadily beside him. He opened his eyes when Helen entered. Those aged eyes flashed with astonishment and pain, as if seeing a ghost from the past come to life. He tried to sit up but had no strength at all, only his trembling hand reaching toward her as if begging for a touch. Mom stood motionless at the door, clutching her purse tightly, her eyes red. I stood behind her, my heart beating like a drum, afraid to breathe loudly. That moment stretched endlessly, the rain outside the window tapping steadily as if counting down time. Charles choked out an apology, his voice breaking amid fits of coughing. "Helen, I'm sorry. Sorry for being a coward, for abandoning you, for leaving you alone to face that harsh life." He paused, gasping for breath, tears rolling down his wrinkled cheeks. "I chose wrong. Chose my family, chose power instead of you, the woman I loved most." He begged for her forgiveness like a plea from someone about to leave this world, not to be accepted, but to ease the torment that had haunted him for 40 years. His voice was weak but full of sincerity, as if pouring out his entire soul. Mom stood motionless, her eyes red, her face paling under the dim light. She accused him of being heartless and selfish, her voice trembling but firm. "Charles, you were so cruel. You chose your family and power instead of protecting the only woman who ever truly loved you. You left me with humiliation, with nights crying alone, with a life full of hardship." She paused, wiping her tears, her voice rising. "The years raising our son alone are a pain that no apology can ever compensate for. I ran away, changed my life just to escape your shadow and that family's." Charles listened to every reproach without dodging or defending himself. He lay there, eyes fixed on Mom in agony, accepting it all as deserved punishment for the wrong he had done. "You're right. I deserve this," he whispered, coughing violently, the oxygen tank humming louder. The room sank into heavy silence, broken only by the rain falling against the window and his labored breathing. I stood by the door, my heart constricting. Before me were two people who had once loved each other deeply, now facing each other in the most belated moment of their lives. Charles slowly turned to me, his gaze trembling but determined. He took a deep breath, then admitted, his voice breaking, "Rowan, a few weeks ago when suspicions began to arise, I asked my private doctor to conduct a DNA test, discreetly and legally. I needed to know the truth before it was too late." He swallowed hard, his voice nearly shattering. "The results confirmed. You are my biological son." His words struck like lightning. Even though I had heard it from Mom, hearing it from him made everything more real. He coughed and gasped, his voice faint. "Helen, please. Let me acknowledge the son I never got to hold even once in my life. I'm not asking to be his father. I'm only asking to leave this world without carrying the regret of having lost everything." Mom looked at me, the son she had spent her whole life protecting. The years of fleeing, poverty, fear, all rushed back in her eyes, making her tremble. She saw in my eyes the longing to know where I belonged, the vulnerability hidden behind calm. I stood there, tears welling up, unable to speak, only looking at her pleadingly. Finally, she nodded, her voice soft. "All right. I won't forgive completely, but for my son, so that he doesn't live with the emptiness I once carried." Her words untied the knot, and the room seemed to lighten a little, even though the rain still poured heavily. Then I stepped closer to Charles, my legs heavy as lead, my heart pounding. He tried to raise his hand. His aged, cold, trembling hand touched my cheek for the first time. A touch like an electric shock, warm yet painful. I took hold of that hand, his skin wrinkled, his pulse faint. In that moment, all the anger, pain, and loss inside me burst into a chaotic, profound emotion, as if I were looking into a mirror of the loneliness Charles had carried his whole life. He, my father, had lived in wealth but emptiness, and now only Mom and I were by his side. Charles tried to say something, but no sound came, only wheezing breaths. I leaned down and for the first time in my life uttered the two words I never thought I would say. "Dad." My voice broke, tears falling onto his hand. Just that one call made Charles sob. The old man choked up, gripping my hand tightly as if afraid of being pulled away from the only precious moment he had waited for half his life. He whispered the words, "My son," his eyes lighting up one last time. Mom stepped closer, standing beside us, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. We, 3 people, sat together like an incomplete family in the room filled with the scent of death. A few minutes later, Charles's breathing slowed. He slumped in my arms beside Helen, the 2 people who should have been his family if not for one wrong decision long ago. I felt his breath weaken, his skin grow colder, and his heart stop. When Charles drew his final breath, I collapsed, hugging the cooling body of the father I had only just gained. The pain tore at my soul. Pain from losing a father, pain from meeting too late. Pain from realizing that love arriving even a moment too late becomes lifelong loss. I sobbed uncontrollably, shoulders shaking. Mom hugged me from behind, her tears falling on my hair. The room was silent, only the steady rain outside the window, like a quiet farewell to that life full of regrets. We sat together for a long time, holding each other in the vast villa that now felt even more empty. I thought about what had been lost, a complete family, the years I should have spent with my father, and felt a sharp ache in my heart. But amid that pain, there was a small sense of peace. At least he had passed not alone, carrying with him the call of Dad that he had perhaps waited for his entire life. We left the Blackwell villa under pouring rain. My mother held my hand tightly, not saying a word. On the bus ride back, rainwater streamed down the windows, reflecting our weary faces. I took my mother to my small apartment in Portland. I no longer wanted her to be alone in Oregon City. She lay on the sofa, eyes closed, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. The pain was too great for her to drift off. I brewed hot tea and sat beside her, trying to find words of comfort. "Mom, everything will be okay. My father, passed away peacefully." She nodded, but tears rolled down her cheeks. That night, I lay awake, replaying the moment he held my hand, his breath faint. My father, those 2 words still felt strange, yet strangely warm. The next morning, Harvey Caldwell called, his voice somber. "The funeral will be held on Saturday at an upscale funeral home in downtown Portland. Mr. Charles specifically designated you and Mrs. Helen on the special guest list." His words startled me. We, strangers to his world, were now invited to a place reserved for the elite. I told my mother. She was silent for a long time before nodding. "We have to go, Rowan. To bid him farewell one last time." I prepared for the funeral with a heavy heart. I bought a cheap black suit from a discount store and ironed it carefully in my cramped apartment, the smell of new fabric mixing with the familiar mustiness. Mom wore a simple black dress and her old wool scarf. Her face was pale but resolute. We took a taxi to the funeral home, a luxurious building with marble columns and lush gardens, even though light rain was still falling. Inside, the air was chilly, the scent of lilies pervasive, and the polished wooden casket sat in the center of the grand hall, covered in white flowers. The board of directors, major shareholders, and top executives of Blackwell Aviation were all present. Men in expensive suits, women in sparkling jewelry, whispering about Charles's legacy. They nodded politely to one another, but the atmosphere lacked warmth, feeling more like a business meeting than a funeral. Mom and I stood quietly in a corner, pressed against the wall, feeling out of place amid that powerful crowd. We were there by his final wishes, yet why did I feel like an intruder? My heart raced, a mix of nervousness and fear. Did anyone know our secret? As the ceremony was about to begin, somber organ music filled the air and the large doors creaked open. An elegant woman entered with a young man, both sharing the same cold, distant demeanor as if carved from ice. She was tall, hair in an elegant updo, wearing an expensive black outfit with exquisite tailoring, diamond jewelry glittering under the lights. The young man beside her, about 28 years old, wore a dark gray suit, hair slicked back, his eyes scanning the room indifferently. They were Eliana Blackwell, Charles's wife, and Nolan Blackwell, his son, who had lived in London for many years. I knew about them from Charles's passing mentions: an arranged marriage, a distant son with little contact. They drew everyone's attention as they entered. Whispers arose. "Mrs. Blackwell has arrived. Young Mr. Nolan flew in from England." Eliana walked straight ahead, chin held high, her face showing no grief, only pride and irritation, as if being here was a burden. Nolan surveyed the room with indifference, as though attending only out of obligation or for some gain. Perhaps the enormous inheritance. They took seats in the front row but did not bow their heads, merely staring at the casket with impassive expressions. As soon as she entered, Eliana immediately noticed the two strangers, Mom and me, standing in the prominent area near the casket. She frowned, narrowed her eyes, then strode over to Harvey Caldwell nearby and asked in a low voice loud enough for those around to hear, "Who are those people? Why are they standing in the family area?" Harvey replied calmly and professionally. "That is Rowan Knox, the chairman's caregiver, and his mother, Mrs. Helen Knox. They were specifically designated by Mr. Charles on the special list." Eliana's gaze turned icy and hostile, sharp as a blade. She whipped around to stare at us, lips pressed tight. I felt a chilling wave from her. My heart beat faster. The ceremony began with the pastor's prayers and echoing organ music, but I couldn't focus. Eliana's eyes kept glancing at us, full of suspicion. During the intermission for viewing, Eliana approached me directly, deliberately loud enough for others to hear, her voice sharp with contempt. "Excuse me, but why is a caregiver standing in the Blackwell family area? This isn't a place for outsiders." Her words hit like a splash of cold water. Several people turned to look, whispers rising. Mom gripped my hand tightly, her face paling. I took a deep breath and replied gently but firmly, "Ma'am, I am here in accordance with Mr. Charles's final instructions. I have no intention of offending or claiming any position. He considered us family." My words momentarily stunned Eliana. Her eyes widened in surprise, but her expression quickly darkened with irritation at being challenged by someone she viewed as inferior in front of so many people. She tilted her head, lowering her voice just enough for me to hear, laced with venom. "Do you think you belong here? Don't meddle in Blackwell family affairs. We don't welcome outsiders." Her words stung like needles, but I didn't respond, only meeting her gaze steadily, my heart pounding with anger. A few nearby shareholders exchanged curious glances and whispered, "Charles cared that much about his caregiver? Strange. He must have been very lonely in his final days." They weren't used to seeing Charles show concern for anyone, let alone an ordinary caregiver like me. The tension spread like a ticking time bomb. Mom stood beside me, face ashen, avoiding Eliana's eyes. For the first time, I saw my mother, the woman who had faced life alone, appear so small and vulnerable, shrinking like a withered leaf under the cold wind from that powerful woman. Her hands clutched mine as if pleading for help, stirring in me a mix of anger and heartache. Why did she have to endure this? Nolan then approached, looking at Mom and then at me with disdain, a sarcastic smile curling his lips. He asked Harvey in a half-joking, half-cutting tone, "Who are these people? My father's caregiver? Why are they standing here like family? Or did Dad get senile in his old age?" Those words made my heart skip a beat, not from shame, but from the raw callousness of Nolan mocking the father I had only just touched before he died. He, Charles's biological son, spoke of his father like a stranger, full of calculation. Harvey tried to ease the tension, his voice polite. "Mr. Nolan, this is in accordance with Mr. Charles's wishes. Please respect his final requests." But Eliana and Nolan remained standing there, their eyes warning me that the Blackwell family did not accept outsiders. They turned away, whispering to each other, and the funeral atmosphere grew even more oppressive. The ceremony continued with speeches from company leaders praising Charles as a pioneer in aviation, but no one mentioned his loneliness or the warm moments of his final days. I stood there listening, my heart in turmoil. My father, that great man, reduced to empty platitudes. When people approached the casket to pay respects, Mom and I stepped forward. My hand trembled as I touched the cold wood. I could only whisper his name, tears streaming down. Eliana watched us from afar, eyes full of suspicion. That night, as Mom and I left the funeral under heavy Portland rain, cold wind whipping our faces and carrying the scent of damp earth, we took a taxi home in silence, rain pounding on the roof. And I had a clear premonition that Charles had left something that could upend the entire Blackwell family. Perhaps his will, or an even greater secret. My heart raced, excitement mixed with fear. The storm hadn't ended. It was only just beginning. In the days following the funeral, our lives felt suspended in a thick fog. Portland continued to rain endlessly, the streets slick and wet, and my small apartment became a temporary refuge for my mother. She stayed with me, unwilling to return alone to Oregon City. And we spent our time sitting at the kitchen table, drinking hot tea, talking vaguely about old memories. Safe things that didn't touch the fresh pain. But every night I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, replaying the contemptuous looks from Eliana and Nolan at the funeral. They, Charles's official wife and son, had stared at us like intruders, and their words still echoed in my head. "We don't welcome outsiders." I wondered, did they know the secret about me? That I was Charles's biological son? Or did they simply see us as lowly people unworthy of standing beside his casket? Mom tried to maintain her composure, but I noticed she grew paler, ate less, and sometimes sat alone staring out the window, her eyes red. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" I asked, and she shook her head. "Just the past. Don't worry." But I did worry. Worried that the storm I had sensed was drawing near. 1 week after the funeral, just as I had anticipated, Harvey Caldwell sent a notice. The letter arrived by mail, a thick envelope with the gleaming Blackwell Aviation seal under the kitchen light. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it and read aloud to Mom. "Dear Mr. Rowan Knox and Mrs. Helen Knox, you are invited to attend the reading of Mr. Charles Blackwell's will at the main offices of Blackwell Aviation this Wednesday at 10 a.m. Mom sat motionless, her teacup growing cold in her hands, her face paling. "Mom, should we go?" I asked, my voice lowering. She looked at me for a long time before nodding. "I think we should go, Rowan. Your father left something for us. We can't avoid it forever." Her words tightened my chest. This wasn't just a will. It was the conclusion to a chapter of life filled with chaos. The waiting days stretched on endlessly. I continued my caregiver work with Mrs. Margaret, helping her eat and telling stories. But my mind wandered. Every afternoon on the way home, I thought about the Blackwell Aviation offices, the towering building in downtown Portland, a symbol of the power and wealth Charles had built. How would we, a poor mother and son, walk into that place? How would we face Eliana and Nolan? My premonition grew stronger. This would be a battle, not an ending. Wednesday arrived. The Portland sky was still rainy but lighter, as if the heavens were holding their breath in anticipation. I wore the black suit from the funeral. Mom wore her simple gray wool dress. We took a taxi to the Blackwell Aviation offices. The building soared high, its glass gleaming under rare sunlight breaking through the gray clouds, with the massive aviation logo atop it. We entered the grand lobby, the polished marble floor reflecting our images. Uniformed staff glanced at us curiously. Harvey was waiting by the elevator, his face serious yet warm. "Thank you both for coming. Everyone is waiting." We rode to the top floor, down a vast hallway lined with artwork and the aroma of premium coffee. As we entered the conference room, a large glass-walled space overlooking the rainy city, Eliana and Nolan were already seated around the long wooden table, alongside several lawyers and shareholders. Both froze in shock upon seeing us, as if witnessing the greatest insult of their lives. Eliana, in an expensive black business suit with her hair in a tight bun, flushed red and stood abruptly. "What is this? Why were they let in? This is a family will reading." Nolan, sitting beside her, sneered with full contempt. "Harvey, are you joking? Why let outsiders attend Blackwell family matters? Who are they? The caregiver and his old mother?" His words cut like a knife, echoing in the silent room. Mom gripped my hand tightly, her face ashen, and anger flared up in me like fire. We were insulted, humiliated, and nearly driven from the room. Eliana pointed at the door. "Get out now. This isn't a place for people like you." Nolan stood, slamming his hand on the table with a mocking smile. "Exactly. Leave before I call security." The conference room atmosphere was taut as a wire. A few shareholders exchanged glances and whispered. Harvey raised his hand, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Eliana, Mr. Nolan, please remain calm. Mr. Rowan Knox and Mrs. Helen Knox are named in the will. They were invited in full compliance with legal procedures." His words momentarily stunned Eliana and Nolan. Their mouths gaped, but their hostile eyes burned even brighter. Eliana slumped back into her seat, face flushed. "The will? How could they be in the will? This is a joke!" Nolan glared at us as if he could devour us alive, lips curling. "This must be fraud." Harvey signaled for everyone to sit, then opened the sealed envelope on the table and read the will in an even voice. The room fell deathly silent, broken only by the pattering rain against the glass. The will was revealed, and its words exploded like a bomb. The majority of Charles's personal assets, including the lakeside property in Lake Oswego with its vast villa, a large share of Blackwell aviation stock, a trust fund worth millions, and a substantial cash account, were bequeathed to my mother and me as the family to whom he owed a lifelong debt. Harvey read the details. I, Charles Blackwell, bequeathed to my son Rowan Knox and his mother Helen Knox the entire Lake Oswego villa, 60% of the company shares, a trust fund valued at $50 million, and my personal bank accounts. This is my way of compensating for the years I missed. The remainder, including ownership of minor assets like a New York apartment and a symbolic annual allowance, was left to Eliana and Nolan in accordance with marital obligations, but it was clearly far less than they expected, only about 10% of the total estate. I sat frozen like a statue, my ears ringing. Even knowing Charles was my biological father, I had never imagined he would leave me the bulk of his fortune as a final way to make amends for all the lost years. The lakeside villa, company shares, luxuries I had only dreamed of. Beside me, Mom couldn't suppress her trembling. She gripped my hand so tightly it hurt, a mix of pain, anger, and uncertainty about how to accept this decision. In stark contrast, Eliana jumped up screaming that it was a conspiracy, her voice shrill and echoing. "Impossible. This is a scam. They took advantage of Charles when he was weak, manipulating him." She pointed at us, face flushed. "Gold diggers! They set a trap to steal the Blackwell fortune." Nolan slammed the table again, the sound booming, his face twisted in rage. "Exactly. My father wasn't of sound mind when he signed this. They must have coerced him, exploiting his loneliness to seize everything. They demanded Harvey review and invalidate the will immediately, insisting Charles lacked mental capacity when signing it." Eliana lunged at the table, snatching the documents. "I'll sue them. This is forgery." Nolan nodded, voice growling. "We'll overturn this. No way we'll let outsiders take our fortune." The conference room boiled with tension. Shareholders whispered. Lawyers scribbled frantically. But Harvey calmly affirmed everything was valid and incontestable. The will was signed in the presence of witnesses with video recording and medical confirmation of Mr. Charles's full mental capacity. The law protects this. That silenced Eliana and Nolan. They stood breathless with rage like caged beasts. Unable to do more, Eliana grabbed Nolan's arm and stormed out. But before leaving, she turned back to glare at us and coldly threatened. "This isn't over. We'll sue and you'll regret ever meddling in Blackwell family affairs." The door slammed shut, their footsteps echoing down the hall. As the office gradually emptied, leaving only Harvey and a few staff, Mom and I quietly departed. Harvey shook my hand, voice low. "Mr. Charles prepared thoroughly. Be careful with those two." We took the elevator down to the lobby and out into the misty rain. In the taxi home, Mom sat silently, hands trembling. "Rowan, what will we do with all this?" I hugged her, my heart surging with chaotic emotions. Gratitude to Charles for his final gift, pain from losing him, unease from Eliana's threats, and especially the premonition that from now on our lives would no longer be peaceful. That fortune, millions of dollars, the villa, the shares, was like a ticking time bomb, and Eliana and Nolan would not let it rest. My heart raced. Excitement mingled with fear. The real storm was coming. In the days following the will reading, everything changed at a dizzying pace, as if we had been swept into a vortex with no escape. The next morning, as I woke up in my small apartment and brewed black coffee as usual, I opened my phone and saw the news flooding in. Major Portland newspapers, the Oregonian Willamette Week, ran sensational headlines. Aviation billionaire leaves massive fortune to caregiver and his mother. Shocking secret behind Charles Blackwell's will. The news of my mother and me inheriting the bulk of Charles's estate spread rapidly across the media, followed by a barrage of articles, comments, and speculation that weighed heavily on us. On social media, Twitter and Facebook exploded. Real professional gold diggers. The Blackwell family got robbed blind. Malicious comments cut like knives, calling us opportunists, professional scammers, and even insinuating that my mother was an old mistress coming back to steal the fortune. I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling as I scrolled through the screen, my heart tightening. We had once lived in peace. Now we were suddenly at the center of a media storm. Reporters called incessantly, knocked on the apartment door, asking insensitive questions. How do you feel about suddenly becoming rich? I turned off my phone, drew the curtains tight, but fear had already crept into every corner of the home. At first, I thought it was just rumors that would pass, but I quickly realized things were far worse. I began to feel like I was being followed, a chilling sensation, as if someone was always staring at my back. The first time, as I walked home from the bus stop after a shift, I noticed a man in a black coat loitering near the apartment, smoking a cigarette, his eyes glancing toward my window. I thought he was just a neighbor, but the next day he was there again, and this time, when I looked back, he turned his face away. My heart raced. I hurried inside and double-locked the door. Then strange cars parked out front for hours. A shiny black SUV with tinted windows idling about 50 meters from the apartment, engine running. I peered through the curtains, seeing shadowy figures inside, and unease filled me. Silent phone calls at night kept me on constant alert, the phone ringing at midnight. When I answered, I heard only heavy breathing before it hung up, leaving me unable to sleep deeply. I lay awake, listening to every sound in the hallway, wondering, who was doing this? Eliana and Nolan, or someone they hired? The pressure mounted and the threats became more concrete. I kept receiving anonymous letters, threatening messages slipped into the mailbox or under the door, plain white envelopes with no name, scrawled handwriting. Give back what isn't yours or you'll regret it. They were pushed under the door or mailed, and each time I opened one, my heart nearly stopped. Someone even threw rocks at the apartment windows, leaving me tossing and turning every night, half asleep. The first time, the sound of shattering glass rang out at 1 a.m. I jolted awake, ran to the window, and saw broken shards and a rock rolling on the floor. Mom rushed out in panic. "Rowan, what's happening?" I hugged her. "It's okay, Mom, probably just kids messing around." But I knew it wasn't. A warning. In the nights that followed, I lay staring at the ceiling, ears pricked for any noise, my sleep fitful and filled with nightmares. Eliana mocking, Nolan smashing things, and Charles watching me sadly from afar. The peaceful life I once had, taking the bus to work, simple dinners, had turned into hell. I added extra locks, installed motion sensor lights, but the fear clung relentlessly. Then the climax came on a drizzly afternoon while I was at Mrs. Margaret's house helping her bathe. My phone rang. It was Mom, her voice trembling over the speaker. "Rowan, someone followed me from the supermarket all the way home. He's standing in front of the door, peering in like he's scouting. I'm so scared." My heart stopped. I dropped everything. "Lock the door, Mom, I'll be right there." I rushed out into the street, hailed a taxi back to the apartment. Rain poured heavily. The streets blurred past, and an inexplicable dread rose within me. When the taxi stopped in front of the building, the hallway lights were on, but my apartment was pitch black. The front door was ajar. My chest tightened. I pushed the door open and froze in horror. The room had been completely ransacked. Furniture scattered across the floor, dishes shattered, books torn apart, the table shoved aside, the sofa tipped over, as if ravaged by blind rage. Mom was huddled in the corner, terrified, face ghostly pale, hands clutching her chest. "Mom, are you hurt?" I ran to her, hugged her, checking for injuries. She sobbed uncontrollably. "They broke in, smashed everything. I was so scared, Rowan." I immediately called the police. They arrived, took notes, fingerprints, photos, and left with a promise to investigate thoroughly. But I knew without concrete evidence the case would fade into oblivion. A few days later, as Mom and I were preparing dinner in the apartment, I stir-frying vegetables, her making salad, the front door was suddenly pounded relentlessly, the bangs echoing like thunder. I startled, the knife falling to the floor. Before I could react, the door burst open. I had forgotten to double lock it, and Eliana and Nolan stormed in, faces flushed with fury and hatred. Eliana in an elegant black outfit, hair disheveled, eyes blazing. "You think you can steal my fortune that easily?" Nolan, tall and menacing, charged into the room, sweeping items off the table, dishes crashing, food spilling everywhere. Mom backed against the wall in terror, hands covering her face, voice stammering incoherently. Eliana shouted threats, pointing in my face. "You and your mother will pay if you don't return the Blackwell family fortune. It's mine and Nolan's, not yours, you filthy paupers. We're the legal family on paper. You have no claim at all, understand?" Nolan stepped close, nearly in Mom's face, voice dripping with contempt. "You cheap woman! Did you seduce my father to give birth to this bastard?" Then he whipped around to me, eyes full of venom. "And you filthy bastard, you think you're worthy of standing alongside the Blackwell family?" Those words stabbed straight into my chest. Mom reeled, legs buckling. I caught her just in time. I pulled her behind me, shielding her, my voice shaking with rage. "Shut your mouth. You have no right to insult my mother." Nolan laughed scornfully, stepping closer. "What are you going to do about it? Call the police or play the victim again?" I clenched my teeth, growling, "Get out of my home. Right now. Don't make me lose control." But Nolan shoved my shoulder hard, staggering me back, then swung his arm to smash a chair against the wall. The crash echoed, wood fragments flying across the floor. Mom cried out, clinging to my shirt from behind. "Rowan, be careful. Stay away, son." I turned to face Nolan, my eyes no longer fearful, only cold and resolute. "If you stay one more second, I'll call the police. And this time, I won't stay silent." The commotion quickly drew neighbors. Doors in nearby apartments flew open. People poured into the hallway. An elderly woman across the hall raised her phone to record, voice trembling but firm. "Call the police. Record everything." Another was already dialing, shouting into the crowd. "Hello, 911. There's a disturbance breaking into an apartment on this floor." Eliana froze as she realized everyone's eyes were on her. Her face paled. She grabbed Nolan's arm, yanking him back. "Enough, Nolan! We're leaving." Nolan tried to resist, but Eliana dragged him toward the door. Before exiting, she turned back, eyes burning with hatred, voice ice cold. "If you two don't relinquish that fortune, I swear I won't let it go." The door slammed shut. Their hurried footsteps faded, leaving a heavy hallway and a devastated apartment behind. But deep in my eyes, something else flashed. I could no longer run. The battle had begun, and I had to stand up to protect my mother at any cost. I called the police, reported the incident, but knew they would deny it. From now on, I would record everything, install cameras, and prepare to confront them. The fortune wasn't the goal. My mother was everything. The storm had arrived, and I was ready to face it. In the hours immediately following the break-in at the apartment, I moved like a robot, acting on instinct. The police arrived quickly, their patrol car lights flashing in the dim hallway. 2 young officers took our statements under the shattered kitchen light. They barged in, Smashed everything and threatened us, I recounted, my voice steady but my hands still trembling. Mom sat beside me, face ashen, repeating the details of Nolan's insults. Cheap woman, filthy bastard, her voice breaking, tears streaming down. The officers photographed the devastation. Broken chair fragments, spilled food, handprints on the walls. We'll investigate, they said, but I caught their looks. This involved the powerful Blackwell family. It wouldn't be straightforward. They left, leaving us to clean up in the dead of night. I swept the floor, wiped the table, temporarily patched the broken window while Mom huddled on the sofa, hugging a pillow. Rowan, we should give it up, she whispered. I knelt before her. No, Mom, we haven't done anything wrong. It was Dad's wish. The will is real and I'll prove it. But inside I was filled with worry. Eliana and Nolan wouldn't stop at threats. I began preparing. The next morning I bought security cameras from a local electronics store and installed them around the apartment. One outside the door, one in the kitchen connected to my phone. I downloaded a recording app, keeping it always ready in my pocket. My caregiver work with Mrs. Margaret continued, but every bus ride I scanned my surroundings, checking for followers. Mom stayed home, afraid to go out alone, and we lived like prisoners in our own small space. Those days dragged on, tension building like a string about to snap. I called Harvey. They're threatening us. The break-in, anonymous letters, everything. He sighed over the phone. I know. They've filed a lawsuit. The inheritance dispute trial will happen soon. Stay calm and document everything. I'll protect the will. His words were like a small flame in the darkness, but I knew the fight would be fierce. Just days after the incident, the media exploded with a barrage of articles as if someone had poured fuel on the fire. Early one morning, I opened my phone and saw sensational headlines on news sites. Caregiver Rowan Knox accused of exploiting frail patient to seize Blackwell fortune, emotional manipulation of lonely billionaire, the dark story behind the shocking will. Tabloids portrayed me as a criminal, photos of me at the funeral cropped and captioned, "Gold digger posing as caregiver deceiving Charles Blackwell in his final days." I sat frozen at the kitchen table holding a cold cup of coffee, heart pounding. Who leaked this? Eliana and Nolan, without a doubt. They were using the media to smear us, turning us into villains in the public eye. Mom came out, saw my face and asked, "They're slandering us again?" I handed her the phone. She slumped into a chair, hand over her mouth. Oh God, how can they be so cruel? The stories spread quickly from local papers to national outlets, speculating about a shady relationship between me and Charles, implying I manipulated the weak old man for his money. Malicious comments flooded social media like a filthy torrent. On Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, people piled on, "This guy's a professional parasite. Took advantage of a lonely billionaire and hit the jackpot. That mother-son duo must have planned it from the start." Many believed the fabrications, sharing articles with angry emojis, making me feel scrutinized and whispered about wherever I went. But I didn't defend myself, didn't speak out, didn't respond to the press. Reporters ambushed me, thrusting microphones in my face. "What do you have to say about the manipulation allegations?" I shook my head and walked away, choosing silence, not out of weakness, but knowing only the law could prove the truth. Harvey advised, "Don't respond. Let the court speak for you." I followed his advice, gritting my teeth and enduring each day an internal battle. Those nights I lay awake thinking of Charles. Had he foreseen this? He left the fortune to make amends, but it dragged us into hell. My premonition was right. The storm was raging, and we were at its center. The inheritance dispute trial took place just weeks later, drawing intense media attention, reporters, and public curiosity throughout Portland. The downtown courthouse was packed. Hundreds gathered outside with phones and microphones, creating a tense atmosphere. Reporters jostled, camera flashes popping, shouts ringing out, "Rowan, are you a fraud?" Mom and I entered through a side door, guided by Harvey, my heart pounding like a drum. Inside the courtroom, the air was icy. Polished wooden benches gleamed. The judge sat high with a stern expression. Eliana and Nolan sat on the opposite side, in expensive suits, faces impassive, flanked by a formidable team of lawyers. They glared at us like enemies. Eliana whispered something to Nolan, lips curling in scorn. In court, Harvey Caldwell presented the full legal documentation proving the will's complete transparency. He spoke calmly, voice echoing, "Your Honor, here is the video of the will signing, witnessed by two legal parties, the doctors and Mr. Charles's secretary." The large screen played the footage. Charles in his lakeside armchair, voice clear, signing with a weary smile. The doctor beside him confirming he was 100% lucid. Next, Charles's personal physician testified in writing that he was fully competent and of sound mind at the signing. No signs of confusion, no coercion or influence. Harvey then opened another file, revealing Charles had prepared everything in advance. It included legally obtained DNA test results from an independent lab. Samples compared Charles's medical records with my biological sample collected during routine care, with full signatures and clear chain of custody. The conclusion confirmed I was his biological son. Additionally, there was evidence of my over-a-year caregiving, work schedules, daily medical notes, treatment invoices, and handwritten entries by Charles himself. In them, he repeatedly noted that Eliana and Nolan had no contact, no visits, no inquiries for years, not a call, not a card, and only appeared when money was involved. These documents showed Eliana and Nolan had zero contact, no visits, not even a birthday card in years. Meanwhile, I was the only one by Charles's side, truly caring for him until the end. Diary entries stating, "Rowan is with me every day, listening and caring like a son." Harvey presented it all convincingly. This is not manipulation, this is genuine family bond. Eliana and Nolan grew agitated, denying everything, but their arguments were weak and contradictory. Eliana shouted, he was deceived. They manipulated him. But their lawyers stumbled, lacking concrete evidence. Nolan slammed the table. My father was senile. But the video and records refuted it all. The courtroom fell silent. The judge nodded, and when delivering the verdict, his voice rang out. The court declares the will fully valid. The plaintiff's accusations lack basis. Defendants Rowan and Helen Knox prevail. Applause erupted in the courtroom, mingled with Mom's sigh of relief. Eliana and Nolan left in humiliation. Media captured their ashen, furious, bitter faces. Eliana covering hers, Nolan yelling into microphones, "We'll appeal!" But the crowd outside cheered. Many who had believed the lies turned against them, criticizing their greed and cruelty. They abandoned the old man and now fight to steal. Reporters swarmed, but I said nothing, just holding Mom's hand as we left. I walked out without looking back, gripping her hand tightly. I understood this wasn't just a legal victory, but a triumph of truth. Charles was vindicated and we were free. Days later, major newspapers issued corrections en masse, publishing full court evidence emphasizing my dedication during Charles's care. Headlines shifted. Caregiver Rowan Knox cleared. Court confirms will's validity. Truth behind dispute. Blackwell family neglected lonely billionaire. Belated apologies appeared, editors writing, "We rushed inaccurate reports. We apologize to Mr. Knox and Mrs. Knox." The public gradually warmed to me, admiring that I never spoke out to protect my father's honor and my mother's peace. Articles praising Rowan Knox, symbol of loyalty and kindness. Old colleagues called, "Sorry, Rowan, we were wrong." Neighbors smiled when we met. My honor restored, I became an image of loyalty, kindness, and resilience, not for the inheritance, but for ultimately winning through truth. Mom smiled for the first time in days. "Son, we finally have freedom." But I knew the journey wasn't over. The wounds remained, but we were stronger. After winning the lawsuit and restoring our honor, I decided not to let the inheritance change who I was. I didn't want to become part of the elite world with its lavish parties and scrutinizing gazes. No, I wanted to live as before, simple, grounded, with my mother by my side. So I contacted Harvey and requested that all the real estate and shares inherited from Charles be sold to start the modest life I had always desired. The selling process took a few months, but Harvey handled it smoothly. The lakeside villa where I once sat sipping tea with Charles gazing at the sparkling water was sold to a young family, and I never returned there, fearing the memories would flood back. The Blackwell Aviation shares were transferred to the board of directors with the condition that the humanitarian spirit Charles had built be preserved. The proceeds, a staggering sum I had never dreamed of, were managed carefully by me. I used a portion to buy a small house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Portland, where the trees are lush and the air is fresh. It was a 2-story wooden house with a small backyard garden, a covered porch for rain, and a cozy living room with an old fireplace. Not luxurious like the villa, but enough for the two of us. Separate bedrooms, a spacious kitchen for cooking, and a reading nook by the window. I brought my mother to live with me to care for her and make up for the years she had endured fear and hardship alone. "Mom, this is our home," I said as she stepped inside. Her eyes sparkled. "Son, I never thought we'd have a beautiful house like this." She hugged me, and for the first time after all the turmoil, we truly laughed. Laughter echoing in the new house, dispelling the shadows of the past. From the remaining assets, I opened a small family-style restaurant, a warm, welcoming place where I personally cooked the dishes my mother had made for me throughout my childhood. The idea came to me during sleepless nights after the trial. Why not share the warmth we had once lacked? The restaurant was on a peaceful street near our home, simply named Knox's Kitchen. I rented a small space with simple wooden flooring and old but spotlessly clean tables and chairs. On the walls hung a few family photos, not to show off, but to remind me why the place existed. Mom helped me create the menu, all familiar home-cooked dishes, vegetable soup using her secret recipe, toasted bread with butter, simply seasoned roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and the pudding she used to make every winter back when we were struggling, but always tried to prepare a decent meal for each other. I cooked myself, standing behind the counter in a white apron, smiling as I greeted customers. "Welcome. Would you like to try my mom's soup today?" The restaurant quickly attracted locals for its authenticity and heartwarming feel. Tired workers after shifts, single mothers with young children, even some lonely elderly folks. They came not just for the delicious food, but for the family atmosphere, soft music, the aroma of baking, and the stories I shared about our hard times. "This place feels like home. It's so warm," a regular said, and I smiled. That's exactly what I intended. The revenue wasn't huge, but enough to live on, and every evening when closing up, I felt at peace. This was the life I chose, not one forced upon me. I didn't keep all the money for myself. From the remaining assets, I established a fund called Helen's Hope to support poor workers, single mothers, and those struggling in difficult circumstances, as a way to give back to life and continue the compassionate legacy Charles had left. We held the first event in Portland, inviting local single mothers to share their stories. And Mom stood up to tell about the years raising me alone. My hope is that no one else has to go through that. The news spread, people supported it, and the fund quickly received community donations. Every time I signed a check to help a single mother, I thought of Charles. He had been lonely, but now his legacy helped hundreds. While our lives gradually stabilized, Eliana and Nolan, the ones who had once threatened us, faded from the picture. After being shunned by the community and exposed by the media, they left the US for London in shame and bitterness. Newspapers reported. Blackwell family suffers humiliating defeat, accused of greed and abandoning lonely billionaire. They lost their reputation in high society, shareholders turned away, friends distanced themselves, and their names became an example of greed and cruelty. Eliana, once so proud, now avoided cameras. Nolan, the callous young man, was fired from his job in London due to the scandal. I didn't gloat, I only felt pity. They had chosen that path and now bore the consequences. No more threats, no more stalking. We breathed a sigh of relief. But I didn't forget. The scars from their insults remained, reminding me to stay strong. From then on, my life with my mother became more peaceful than ever. Simple breakfasts with toast and coffee. Mom reading old books by the window while I prepared for the restaurant. Afternoons tending the backyard flowers, Mom teaching me to grow vegetables like back in Oregon City, us laughing about our poor memories. Evenings, we sat on the porch watching stars twinkle through the trees, talking about the future instead of the painful past. "What do you think about traveling?" Mom asked, eyes bright. I smiled. "Anywhere, as long as you're with me. But I think no matter where, just being together like this is enough. No more fear, no more running, only peace, like the gift Charles had left." One early autumn morning, when golden leaves began to fall, I took Mom to visit Charles's grave. The cemetery was on the outskirts of Portland, quiet with tall oak trees, a cool breeze blowing through. We walked the gravel path, holding a bouquet of white flowers, the kind he liked. His grave was simple, the stone marker engraved Charles Blackwell with the inscription, "One who soared high but found peace at the journey's end." Helen stood before it for a long time, no longer resentful, only quiet regret for an unfinished love. She knelt, placed the flowers, and whispered, "Charles, I've forgiven you. Thank you for Rowan." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but not from pain, from release. I stood beside her, gazing at the stone, feeling heavy yet serene. He was gone, but the truth he left helped us enter a new chapter. He didn't just leave money, he gave us the chance to live true to ourselves. Looking back on everything, from the unfinished Christmas night, the past secret, the final meeting, the tense funeral, the fierce trial, to the dark threats, I understand that no one can choose where they are born, but we always have the right to choose how we live. No matter how low the starting point or how trampled we are, kindness and perseverance can carry a person through the greatest injustices. I was once poor, once humiliated, once lived in fear. But I chose silence, chose to face it with truth, and step by step stood firm on my own feet. After all the loss and upheaval, I realized that true strength lies not in money or power, but in those who stay by your side when the world turns away. My mother raised me with quiet sacrifice. Long night shifts, meals she gave up portions of, nights crying alone after I slept. That is the most precious asset of my life, incomparable to anything. She was my support through the hard years, and now it was my turn to be hers. As the journey closes, I want to tell anyone feeling lost, don't let hatred guide your life. Keep your heart pure, stand firm for what's right, and protect those you love with everything you have. The rest, time will answer. I once hated Eliana and Nolan, but now only pity them. Hatred only exhausts us. Mom and I left the cemetery in silence, holding hands as if to affirm that after everything, we still had family. And that is the most precious thing.